Hello, I'm going to read to you about World War II. World War II, often abbreviated to World War II, also known as the Second War of a Global War that lasted 1939 to 1945. The vast majority of the world's countries, including all the great powers, eventually formed two opposing military alliances, the Allies and the Axis. A state of a total war emerged directly involving more than 100 million people from more than 30 countries. The major participants through their entire economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities behind the war effort, blurring the distinction between civilization and military resources. World War II was a deadest conflict in human history, marked by 70 to 85 million fatalities, most of whom were the civilizations in the Soviet Union and China. It included massacres, the genocide of the Holocaust, tragic bombing from the starvation and disease, and the only use of the nuclear weapons in war. German troops marched through occupied Warsaw, Poland after invading the nation on September and lighting World War II. The planes were first line of defense against German bombers. Attacking England, battles fought between July 10th and October 31, 1940. The first major battle to be won in the air, Japan, in which aimed to dominate Asia and Pacific, was at war with China by 1937, through neither side had declared war on other. World War II is generally said have begun on 1st of September 1939 with invasion of Poland by Germany, the subsequent declarations of war Germany by France and the United Kingdom from late 1939 to early 1941. In a series campaigns and treaties, Germany's conquered or controlled much of continental Europe and formed the Axis alliance with Italy and Japan under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939. Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned the territories of their European neighbors. World War II changed the political agreement and social structure of the global. The United Nations was established to foster international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. The victorious. Next page. Great power of China, France, and Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States emerged as rival superpowers, setting the stage for triggering the declination of Africa and Asia. Most countries whose industries had been damaged moved towards economic recovery and expansion. Political integration, especially in Europe, emerged as an effort to end pre-war the enmities and create a common identity. Things that caused World War II is leading themes include the political takeover in 1933 of Germany by Adolf Hitler and Nazi Party, which ruthlessly promoted an aggressive foreign policy in violation of Versailles Treaty of 1919. Japanese militarism against China, Italy aggression against Ethiopia, and the success of Germany in forming at the end of World War II, huge swaths of Europe and Asia have been reduced to run. Borders were and homecomings, explosions, and burlows were underway, but massive efforts to rebuild had just begun when the war began in the late 1930s. World's population was exponentially 2 billion in less than a decade. The war between the Axis, the Allied powers, had resulted in 80 million deaths, killing off about 4% of the whole world. Allied forces now became occupiers, taking control of Germany, Japan, much of the territory they had formerly ruled. Efforts were made to permanently dismantle war making. Abilities of nations as factories were destroyed and formal leadership was removed or pursued. War crimes trials to take place in Asia, leading to many executions and prison. Millions of Germans and Japanese were forcibly expelled from territories they called home. Allied occupations and United Nations decisions led to many long-lasting problems in the future, including tensions that created East Germany and divergent plans on known war. In 1950, the United Nations partitions plan for Palestine paved the way for Israel. The declared independence in 1948 and marked the continuing Arab-Israel conflict. Growing tensions between Western powers and the Soviet Eastern Bloc developed into the Cold War and the development and occupation. World War III common ground could not be found. World War III was the biggest story of the 20th century, and its aftermath continues the effect the world profoundly more than 65 years ago. Later, pinpointing the causes of vast global event like the Second War is a challenging task for the historian. Events, especially enormous multiplication events, have multiple events inputs to help analyze the effects of those different inputs. Historians often classify an event's causes into different categories. A proximate cause is an incident that appears to directly trigger an event, as the election of Abraham Lincoln in November 1860 and the selling of Fort Sumter led to. Outbreak of the Civil War. Such dramatic incidents are often the ones we think of as causing an event, since the connection between the trigger and the outcome appears both direct and obvious. In their attempts to explore the cause and effect, however, historians often probe more deeply beyond the triggers to locate trends, developments, and circumstances that contribute equally, if not more, to events. In case of the Civil War, for example, historians often point to the growing sectional polarization that divided the nation in the 1940s and 1850s. The Nationals over the future slavery and the divergent economic paths that distinguished North and South during antebellum period. Full-blown armed conflict in the spring of 1861. Those conditions contribute to a state of affairs in which a triggering event could exert such as enormous influence and touch off a 4-year war. In case of the Second War, historians generally point to a series of conditions that helped contribute to its outbreak. The unbalanced Treaty of Versailles, which forced crippling peace on Germany to end the First World War, and the global depression that enveloped the world during 1930s, which led to particularly disparate in many European nations, as well as the United States, usually emerged as two of the most critical. Those conditions formed the background against which Adolf Hitler could ascend to the position German Chancellor in the 1930s. Virtually all historians of the Second World War agree Hitler's rise to power was proximate cause of the Catalanism War that gripped the global between 1939. Without Hitler and national leader bent on establishing 100-year German inspired through military conquest, it becomes extremely difficult to imagine the outbreak of such as lengthy and devastating war. At the same time, Hitler's rise to power did not occur in a vacuum. Much of this appeal to the German citizens had to do with his promises to restore German honor, believed by many Germans have been for Mortegad via the Treaty of Versailles. The peace of agreement forced Germany to so this is the last page, and I hope y'all liked it. So let's get on to this last page, and then we are done. Yes. Accept full responsibility for the Great War and lift a massive system of reparation payments to help restore areas in Belgium and France devastated during fighting. The Treaty of Versailles also required Germany to disarm its military, restricting it to a skeleton force intended only to operate on defensive. Many Germans viewed the lopsided terms of the treaty as unnecessary, punitive, and profoundly shameful. During the 1930s, Hitler's Germany embarked on a program of a retrimming and indirect violation of the terms of the Versailles Treaty. German industry produced military vehicles and weapons. German men joined flying clubs that served as thin pretense of training military pilots. Retirement and militarization provided appealing avenues for Germans seeking some means to reassert their national pride. Politicians in Britain, France, and the United States were recluded to act to check Hitler's expansion. And that's the end of our essay that we did for the ROTC. Don't forget to like and subscribe.